also Z. My guarantee in our process, because 897 is kind of unique in that it is the candidacy phase of your doctoral program. So literally, when you finish 897, not as though it's a big deal. I don't think it's a big deal, but some students do. You can literally sign your name and then at the end put D.Min and in parenthesis ABD, which means all but dissertation, which has academic value, believe it or not. So it's the doorway into, here's my friend Julie, it's the doorway into, of course, the dissertation phase, which is when the fun really begins. And so my goal is to prepare you for that. I want to make sure that you feel confident, and it can be quite intensive. You know, 897 can be quite intensive because I'm here, you know, and I don't want to be a slave driver. You know, that's really not my nature. But occasionally I feel like I've got a bit of a chair and a whip saying, listen, guys, if we can get this done together, you're going to shine in the dissertation phase. And you'll be very, very happy that we took the time to address some of these issues. And so part of what I'm going to do, you know, we're getting ready to collaborate. We're getting ready to get rid of collaborate. In fact, we're skipping out of Blackboard, which for young people, they just love moving to new, you know, technology. I'll be 72 years in April. This is not good news to me. I said, well, what are we going to do instead of Blackboard? Well, we're going to do Canvas. Okay. I assume somebody's going to teach us old guys how to do Canvas, you know, so it's coming up. Collaborate's on the way out. Fortunately, I've had to use Zoom a lot, even with the dissertation defense events, you know, and that kind of thing. So I'm pretty comfortable here. I'm going to come in every time we have a key point in our process. So tonight we're starting with the statement of the problem question. And so I'm here at the beginning. When we move to the summary of the literature section of the proposal, I'll come back on and unpack that assignment. And then when we move on to the biblical, theological, and historical foundations section of the proposal, I'll come back and I'll unpack that assignment because, you know, those are kind of the big pieces. And then when we're ready for you to start to write your first draft of your proposal, I'll come back on and unpack the use of the template. Now, I don't know if we even had a template yet when Tom was here before. Did you all have a template? So we have, it's not cheating, guys. We have gone through and created a template that is literally already set up for Turabian and for Microsoft Word. You just have to cut and paste content into it. I mean, the automatic, you know, the table of contents, everything is there. And so I try to tell students, look, don't feel bad. When Tom Wilcox took this before, he didn't have a template, but he's back now. He gets the template. And so I will come back in and I will unpack, I'll show it to you, show you how to use it, show how it works, and it kind of gives you a sense of what the draft proposal would look like, etc. So whenever we have a significant piece of our process, then I'm going to come back on Zoom. Every week, I will give you a new video announcement. I don't know how you feel about video announcements. I think for me, because it's helpful for me to have some kind of a visual aid as well as an explanation. And so every single week, I will come back with one of those just to give you the sense that you know where we are and where we need to go this week and how it's going to lead us ultimately to our goal by the end of the semester, etc. So, you know, by the end, you will be submitting your draft proposal. We'll have worked on it together the entire semester. I will send it on to Dr. Flynn. He will appoint a chair for you, and you will be launched. And then you belong to somebody else. I hate to tell you, whoever your chair is going to be, it'll be the two of you riding off into the sunset, whatever that means. Yes, Kyle.
So we're going to be doing the proposal, going through a literature review and the historical and biblical context of all this. It sounds like we're writing about half of the dissertation in this class. Is that about right?
No, it isn't right, because, and again, we will look at all of the details, Kyle, but you will not be writing a literature. Chlorstein, if she wrote anywhere between a 25 and a 35 page literature review for 700, which I think only happened in one of the classes. Were you in Dr. Bob's class?
Yeah, I was in Dr. Bob's class. Yes.
So I love Dr. Bob. He's a funny guy, but he's the only one that had that vision. So students who were in that class, they have leapt ahead of 897 and are anticipating chapter 2 of the dissertation, because we don't require anything like that in the proposal. You will be asked to do probably a 10 to 12 page summary of the literature. It will hit the highlights of what will eventually be the review of the literature. And so Glorstein, Mike, whoever else did with Dr. Bob, you will be leaping ahead. You leapt ahead. So, I think what's good to remember is ultimately when you have a chair assigned to you, it will be up to your chair to decide whether or not, you can say, well, I did chapter 2 with Dr. Bob. And he said, well, we'll see. So he gets to go in and look at it, and it's up to the chair to decide when you have an official chapter 2, etc. What the proposal, which will be probably 30 pages for the entire proposal, it will probably be then converted ultimately into your chapter 1. It will be your chapter 1. But again, it will be up to your chair to say when it is officially chapter 1. I just received 2 new dissertation students from the fall class, and I said, it's kind of cheating to have me as your chair, because I prepared you to write chapter 1 in a way that I would consider to be chapter 1. So, okay, you got it. But if you get a different chair, maybe.
So can you be my chair?
So, and then you're off and running. So you're here because you have a passion and you have a vision and you had an inspiration from the Lord as to the contribution you wanted to make to a real life situation. Mm-hmm. And so that's, it's work. But it's all about then the ministry project. You're collecting and analyzing data. It's all about writing those chapters 1, 2, and 3, which are the research reports essentially. And then you will write chapter 4 that will describe your project, and chapter 5 will present your findings, and then your defense, and then you're done. But that should be kind of enjoyable to you, because you've been thinking about this for a while. You're not in trouble unless you come into this class and say, gee, I changed my mind. I want to do something completely different. Oh boy, that's not good news. That's not good news. The more you thought about it before you coming here, the easier this is going to be. And so you will probably do, Glorstein, Kyle, a 30-page or so proposal, it's just enough to give Dr. Flynn enough information to appoint a chair, and then it's just enough information for your appointed chair to begin to have a sense of where you want to go and how he or she should begin to work with you. So it's good, it's a formal academic process, but it's not. Your dissertation will be at least, are you ready? At least 125 pages, not counting front matter and back matter. If you write a 300-page dissertation, we're going to send you back to summarize some of the stuff, it's just too much. I had a dissertation student a couple of semesters ago that sent me a chapter 3, 126-page chapter 3. I said, no. So chapter 2, chapter 3, we're happy if it's 30 to 35, maybe 40 pages, because we got to read this stuff. And then Dr. Flynn gets to read it. And then the members of the committee get to read it. And then Josh Nangle gets to read it. I mean, so have mercy on us. So it needs to be, it needs to be workable. So tonight, our whole theme is the statement of the problem question. It's the research question. So when you think in terms of general terms, it's the research question. That's what I'm going to focus on. And then we'll have some Q&A time. And let me share the screen with you. And I'm going to get that up and running, get the slideshow going. And I've got 2 monitors going, so I need to make sure that they're working together. And now they are. Okay. So the statement of the problem question is the bullseye. No matter what kind of a formal academic process you're doing, you need to have a research question that's really, really clear. If it's too broad, it's going to require you to do more work than you need to do. If it's too vague, it's not going to be precise enough for you to be able to base a research project on. So it's one of those typical things, you know, if you were writing a master's thesis, it would be a similar kind of a thing. By the way, can I say just a quick word about the difference between a doctor of ministry process and a PhD process? They're very similar. However, the doctor of ministry program is aimed at applied research. So, or we could call it practical research. Some would call it practical theology. I think the best term is applied research. So your aim is at a very specific, concrete research context in which you're proposing to suggest some kind of a, you know, we usually call it an intervention, and then you're going to test it. And as a result of testing your intervention, it will be available to others to use. So, you know, you're going to have a usable model for your specific situation, but because you're taking the time to test it, it's usable afterwards by other people. They can consult your dissertation. They can take advantage of the work that you did and find it very, very useful. So it all begins with this whole idea of the statement of the problem question. I mentioned in my video announcement that the week 1 assignment, which is a peer review opportunity, which simply means there is a peer review rubric that's applied, that's made available to you right at the beginning of your group. And that peer review rubric has, I think, probably the best definition of these assignments. So you get to use it to provide feedback for another member of your group, but it also is valuable to you because it gives you a very clear definition of the assignment. So here's the research question is usually what I call it in general. There are 5 elements that we're going to look for that enable your statement to be very, very precise and enable it to be the basis for your research project. And it also gives you a sense of direction then when it comes to your research. You know, your research is in 2 pieces. It's a research in the literature, which includes potentially cross-disciplinary literature. And then there is the piece that is that's on biblical, theological, and historical. You know what, I find D.Min students in 897 struggle more with the latter. Because, for instance, if you did some kind of a lit review in 700, you already pretty well know what it is you're going to be talking about. Now you've got to go specifically into the Bible, into Christian theology, into church history. But that's extremely valuable in terms of setting the stage for all that you're going to do as a D.Min student. So the statement of the problem question has 5 elements in it. First of all, it needs to be a question. That's very simple. It's stated as a question. Second of all, it identifies a problem. Now, you know, if quite a few of you are active pastors, And I was for 21 years, I was a pastor. Planted a church with my dad many, many years ago, 1972. And so we hesitate to use the word problem. We don't want to admit that the church has a problem or the church has problems. So you could call it a challenge. You could call it an issue that needs to be addressed in a research kind of way. Usually we just call it a problem. In other words, there is an issue that you think needs to be addressed and needs to be researched, and you need to be able to suggest a possible kind of a solution or something that will contribute positively to it. And then you have to test that solution in a real life situation. So the problem is stated because that's what you propose to investigate specifically. Then it's kind of tricky, but there are just a couple of words that imply design. So design means words that summarize the approach you're going to take to solving the problem. Design, is all about certain kinds of measurements. So are you going to do a survey? Are you going to do maybe a curriculum? Are you going to do a qualitative, background, some background data that you want to generate? But you're not going to be that specific in the statement of the problem question. You're really implying it by the way you say it. Methodology is all about qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method approaches to analyzing your data. And you can't say a lot about that. Even in the proposal, you're trying to anticipate a bit, but you need to be aware of the fact that you don't have an approved either a project design or, of course, the methodology that you are going to use to analyze the data that you collect in the project design. None of that is official until you have an HSR application that has been approved by Dr. Flynn. So everything we're doing here is anticipatory, maybe a little bit prophetic. If you have that gift, you can say, this is what I really would like to see that I could do. And this is how I would like to be able to analyze that data so I can kind of crunch the numbers or whatever and come through to some helpful conclusion. So methodology, of course, is all about that analysis. And all you can do is just imply fairly vaguely, to be honest. And then the location is absolutely essential because this is all about the work you want to do in a very specific research context. Now, I have to tell you, this has to be as focused as possible. A common mistake is making it too broad. So if you want to say, I want to do a project in an entire denomination, well, let's hope it's real small. Or I want to do a project in the region. All of our related churches in the state of Virginia. Okay, how many years do you want to spend doing that? But I think D.Min students feel like they're kind of cheating if they get too narrowly focused. They said, no, is there a specific group in a specific congregation that you can aim this at? Because you're going to test it. As soon as you test it, it's generalizable. And then if you want to do a follow-up, kind of a postdoc, kind of a larger a research project, you can. But for the D.Min project, the narrower, the better. And so, that's one of the things that I think is important. And, when you submit some work toward the end of week 1, I'll use, and all of these points in the process, I'll jump in and give you feedback and say, wow, this is really great. I can see how good and valuable it would be. But if you can narrow the location a little bit more, I think it could be done in the amount of time that you want to take to do it. But then remember, you're going to test. You're going to crunch the numbers, and as a result, your report will be generalizable so other people can come along and say, well, let me try this in my context. Or you might say, let me try this now in a larger context, which does happen with D.Min students actually. So location is absolutely essential, because it ends up being where your heart is and where your focus is going to be. So I wanted to give you two examples. I'm moving okay, I moved my camera shots up. I wanted to give you two examples. This is the one in the document in Blackboard in your group. So week one, this is the document that's provided in the peer review rubric. And so let's do this one together. And you see there's some pieces of it are more important than others. Others are kind of more anticipatory. You really can't say a lot, but there should be some indication of what you want to do, because this is your research target. So here is the statement of the problem question provided for us. What should constitute an effective and contextualized curriculum for training lay leaders to discern their ministry calling in the inner city Assemblies of God churches of Annapolis, Maryland? Which would work so long as he doesn't have 100 of them, you know. If there's a workable, the sample size per se always ends up being huge when it comes to this research. So is it a question? Well, yes. So right from the very beginning, the first words, what should, implies a question. So that's easy enough.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
From the very first time I read this, why is the word should there? I mean, for brevity purposes, why shouldn't it say what constitutes? I mean, for an active voice, why is the word should there? I know that sounds silly, but that's the first question I asked.
Frederick, it's not silly. The reason why is that it's going to imply a research process. That is to say, we don't know yet what the answer yet is. And so it's somewhat, it's indirect. It's, you know, and I agree, Frederick, the passive voice is usually not preferred in academic writing. But because the research question is implying research that's coming, and then we will draw our conclusions. We're not drawing our conclusions yet. We just want to draw conclusions. And so I think the word should just implies that. So we're anticipating doing some research that will lead us to some conclusions, and we're not sure yet what that is. The problem that's being aimed at is training leaders to discern their ministry calling. And this, you know, this ends up being a common, I have to say that what we would call an educational intervention is fairly common, because I think it seems to be the easiest to design as a project design. It's not that all of them are that way. There are others that are you know, require other kinds of data collection. But an education intervention is somewhat common. So that's what is being identified here. It's a training lay leaders to discern their ministry. How are we going to do that? I want to design a contextualized curriculum, which means a curriculum that's specifically designed for my research context. And whether or not someone else wants to use the results of my research will depend on whether they think they're in a similar kind of context. So it's a contextualized curriculum. Curriculum, again, indicates that it's an educational intervention, which can be tested in any number of ways, you know. A methodology constitutes an effective, again, this is kind of an example of, you can't say a lot about methodology. Do you know yet whether or not you're going to collect qualitative data or quantitative data? Or, well, I don't really know yet. I have some ideas, but those could change in the HHR application process. So we're just wanting to find a way to measure the effectiveness of a curriculum, whatever that ends up being, and it could be, it's not uncommon. I have to tell you, it's not uncommon at this point, for a student to say, I want to add some quantitative data to provide background information, and I'll usually say, and then Dr. Flynn will say, having effective quantitative data really depends on your sample size. So will you have at least 50, data points from your sample? Well, no, I think I may have 8. Well, then you're not making good enough use to. So in other words, this is kind of a decision-making process that carries on, and it is not fulfilled until you launch into 899 and you're dealing with your HSR application, because there's no question that Dr. Flynn, I just had one student who was an active duty Marine Corps chaplain. Some of you maybe know Derek. Took him the entire semester to get his HSR application approved, simply because Dr. Flynn was the starting place. Some admiral in the Navy had to approve it, So you can't be rude to the admiral and say, okay, well, are you stupid? Why is it taking you so long to approve my application? So that's one of those things when you get into 1899, you're not sure. All this methodology language implies that whatever I do, I'm going to test the effectiveness of the curriculum, however I decide to do that. And, it's not uncommon to be in the middle of a project and decide you want to add a measurement that you hadn't even anticipated. Maybe I want to do a couple of follow-up interviews with people who were involved. I see now the value of that in terms of having really usable data or whatever it might be. So these projects, you do the best you can, even in 899 at the beginning, to anticipate and go forward from there and do the best that you can. Location, research context is crucial. And so the location is defined as the inner city Assemblies of God churches of Annapolis, Maryland. And again, Dr. Flynn, for sure, perhaps even me in 897, even though it's not my responsibility to approve or not approve a project design, but I might want to say, well, how many churches do you think that involves? Well, maybe like 7. Well, then I think it's probably just, that's going to be a lot of work. But I think it's doable. If you've got 75, then it may take you a couple of years to collect that data. So make sure it's narrow enough to accomplish, to yield the data that you want from your project. So that's kind of a way of taking a, now, by the way, when you you state your statement of the problem question in week 1, and we're using the group, okay, we're using the discussion board element of the groups. You will do this with your statement of the problem question, and then the rubric, the peer review rubric, will enable another member of the class to take apart your statement in the exact same way. And it should be kind of clear, it's not, I don't think it's difficult. It just forces us to really think about it. I wanted you to do a different project design. I find we have a lot of D.Min students who are chaplains. I don't know yet whether or not any of you are active duty chaplains or hospital chaplains, or any of you in the chaplaincy?
Yes.
Okay, Glorstein. So there's a lot of commonality. Chaplains have a real passion for what they're doing, and there are a lot of similar, the problem they're looking at is not necessarily a congregational problem at all. They're looking at something in the care process that they think needs to be addressed.
Might be more governed toward the church. I'm also a minister and
Okay.
associate, so really heavily involved in evangelism, outreach.
Yeah. So that your research context is kind of determining your approach, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
So you know where you're going to focus your research, and you have a sense of what it is you want to address, and everything else then kind of flows from that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, as I recall, this was someone it's in Memphis, Tennessee. So this chaplain used this again, research question. What paradigm of holistic care might a chaplain develop for the spiritual and social well-being of the aging geriatric residents? And as I recall, I had to really work with her to let's narrow this thing down. Along with their families at the Wesley Graceland Gardens. I think if the King got involved in establishing that one, I don't know how the Graceland got in there. At the Wesley Graceland Gardens, a long-term care and rehabilitation facility in Memphis, Tennessee, where, and I remember proposing, I don't know that this last statement needs to be there at all, because what you don't want to do, you don't want to add a statement to, a clause to this statement that will result in you doing more research than you need to do, or that you actually want to do. But she added, where the facility does not recognize, address, or affirm the whole person. So I remember saying, well, you're going to have to demonstrate that. So you can just leave that off if you want to and still have a really great project. So again, the question is, what might, and again, there is that came up before with the use of the word should. It implies that research is going to happen and we're not entirely sure what we're going to find out. We want to find out. And so we're being a little bit tentative about it at the first. The problem is the spiritual and social well-being of the aging geriatric residents along with their families. And then I don't know what her chair ended up doing this, and she added, where the facility does not recognize, address, or affirm the whole person. So she's thinking about the actual, are they just doing their medical duty? Are they just, or is the process really giving good attention to their spiritual and social well-being? And how do we know whether or not that's effective? In terms of her project design, she used the words paradigm of holistic care. So this is not an educational intervention. She's proposing to suggest a model of care and then to test that model, which is going to be, it's going to be more complicated than if she were just developing a curriculum. There will be more elements to it, but it really needs to be. If she wants to really find out the effectiveness of what's going on at this facility, then I think it's appropriate for her to have as her project design a paradigm to suggest a model of care, and then test the model. All of the the project design ideas you have will ultimately need to be tested. Then the methodology is simply might a chaplain develop for. So again, you can't say a lot about methodology. She just wants to focus on something that will ultimately be beneficial to the chaplain of that facility, either the present chaplain or perhaps even future chaplains, which is going to, with a paradigm, she's going to be able to anticipate that. So whatever she needs to do to analyze the data, it's going to need to show that the chaplain was able to use it in a way that was effective. Again, it's more complicated than just, designing a class or whatever. And then, of course, the location is at the Wesley Graceland Gardens, a long-term care and rehabilitation facility in Memphis, Tennessee. I remember one D.Min student actually did this, but for a short-term rehab, there's, of course, I experienced with my parents who both passed away in 2021. There's the short-term skilled nursing facility, which is for a rehab. And then if they don't rehab, then they send them over to the long-term skilled nursing, which we usually call, a nursing home. Lord help, I never want to end up being one of those. But it is what it is. She has been very specific in saying this is a long-term care facility, and a very specific one. Now she's got to gain access. You know how these research projects work? she's got to gain access. She's probably needs to get the direct cooperation from the chaplain, maybe even somebody else on the staff, on the administrative staff at the long-term care facility in order to conduct her research. You know, if they say, no, we don't want you in here messing around with our stuff, well, then, you know. So one of the big issues that we always face with a research project is the issue of gaining access, gaining all the access that we need. If you want to be a participant observer in a situation, well, you can't just show up. You need to have a somebody there who is giving you permission and signs off, you know, on the document that you have permission to be there and function in one way or another. So that's always true, no matter what is taking place with your research project. So these are 5 simple areas. I think the problem piece and the location piece is frankly the most important. So if we could take 2 out of the 5, you know, the other 3 are fairly easy or implied. If we could take 2 out of the 5 of the research question, I think you will be fairly clear and well on your way. So what I thought would be a good idea to do, let me stop sharing. What I thought would be good to see if you are willing to read what you have so far in terms of a research question and let us just hear it. And you know, we're not here to evaluate necessarily. It would just be, I think, handy and helpful for you, if you're willing, to be able to read for us what you have so far, so we can kind of see your process when we're meeting together tonight. So any of you, do you have the courage to just launch into a reading? Go ahead, Kyle.
I took D.Min 700 with Dr. Flynn, where I did have to write a 24-page literature review.
Yeah.
And so, but this is the original question that was kind of formulated in that class. It says, what does a transformational orthopathic discipleship with an emphasis on the renewal of the mind through personal experiences with God consist of, while implementing it in an existing church structure with the aim of the orthopathy transforming the church orthopraxy at Pathway SFV in Northridge, California?
Yes, and those are great words. I love those. Are like Matt Fretwell words. Have you guys had Matt?
That is exactly who helped me with this.
No, I love Matt. I love Matt. He's a lot smarter than me because he's half my age. So this whole idea of orthopathy affecting orthopathy is kind of the newer, younger guys are focused on the more of the emotional, relational elements in the process. Whereas before, like older guys like me, we would never have thought to even measure that.
Right.
And so this is kind of something new. So what you're proposing, Kyle, and I see Matt Fredwell all over it, which is good. I commend you for that, Kyle, is to be able to find a way to measure the way you propose to affect or orthopathy, which is the emotional, relational elements in a context, and how that then turns around and affects the orthopraxy, the practice of ministry or whatever it might be. That's fascinating. That's fascinating.
Basically, how do we incorporate? I mean, in other words, how do we incorporate soul with spirit and with the outward working of how we do things at the church? Not just how do we do things because that's the way we've always done them, but how are we actually experiencing God? Are we experiencing God? And how does that affect what we do?
I commend you for it. I commend you for it, Kyle. I love the new leaders bringing this element in internationally, even quite frankly. I think it's been some world leaders outside of the United States that have pushed our guys to factor this stuff in. And I'm excited about what you're going to find. You know, the baby boomers like myself, we just wanted to, you know, we just wanted to crunch the numbers and get her done. And so when you add a subjective element and you're going to test the effects of a subjective element, it's going to take some unique kinds of measurements or use, maybe just the use of those measurements in a very interesting way. So I'm excited about that, Kyle. Remember me when you come into your kingdom, brother.
Can I mention one other thing that I've been seriously contemplating about all this?
Yeah.
Is in some of Dr. Bob's classes, I've written some papers that I've really liked how they turned out. And I was thinking of messing with that statement to really look at the identity issue, identity as idolatry, because that's what our culture is pushing. I identify as an 8-foot, Chinese woman. Yeah.
Yes.
Or I identify as my spirit animal, or whatever I choose to identify as.
Yes.
And as I've been listening to, I thought maybe what I already have, that can be a component within the development, that people are not experiencing God because they can't get over themselves.
So find a way to measure that element. You know what you do when you collect data and then you have to analyze it, and use software to help you analyze it. Is you're looking at the connections, you're trying to connect the dots between all the various things that you have been measuring. And that would be one of them. I found out when I moved back to Portland, I have to be clear as to what I self-identify with. I never really thought about it before. I'm just an old Swede from Minnesota. So I had to figure out, I need something cooler than that. So I decided to self-identify as a snowflake. I mean, I've heard sillier ones. So I'm thinking, okay, you got to push me. But that's probably just my way of making fun of the culture at the moment. I think it's great stuff, Kyle. You're gonna, you have your work cut out for you, but I think it's going to be excellent. I think the results will be excellent. Anybody else, you have the courage to read what you have so far?
I was trying to locate what I wrote in Dr. Bob's class, so I'm looking for it right now.
Okay. Yes, Rodney.
I'll try this. All right, this is what I got so far. What should constitute and contextualize a church-based discipleship curriculum designed to create effective disciples for marketplace ministry in North Point Community Church, Alpharetta, Georgia?
Alpharetta, Georgia. Well, again, that's a very excellent, Rodney. I still love the simplicity when it comes down to it of an educational intervention. What the tricky part is for you to be able to find ways to collect relevant data. So you have discipleship, but you also have marketplace ministry, and you have the intersection of the two, don't you, Rodney? And so you will have various ways to measure each and then to compare. If I were you, I would consider even down the road saying, well, I've got some great data. I've tested a curriculum. I've tested its connection to marketplace ministry. Are there a couple of leaders that I can do a follow-up interview with and add their response also to the data before I write my chapter 5 of the dissertation? But it sounds very doable to me, Rodney, and I think it will be excellent and helpful, particularly because you understand your context in Alpharetta to the degree to which either you see the need for, or perhaps the congregation where you're at is beginning to see the need for more focus on marketplace ministry, as well as a focus on discipleship. If you're in a context where that's ringing a bell, then it should be a very, very effective research project, Rodney. That's excellent.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mike.
All right, so mine is working with the emotional health of lead pastors, and my statement right now is would an online assessment immediately followed by results and a variety of resources lead North American MFI, which is Ministers Fellowship International, senior pastors to take action that would improve their emotional health? And actually, I'm going to limit that to Southeastern MFI within our movement.
Yeah, no, because I'm a member of MFI. So Mike probably knows that Ministers Fellowship International was started in 1987 by my spiritual father, Dick Iverson, who probably you have never heard of, who was in Portland, Oregon. And it's grown to well over 2,000 members. So you do have to narrow that down, don't you, Mike?
Yeah, I'm going to narrow it to the Southeast, which is about 30 churches.
So that would be very good. That would be very good. Emotional health, are you going to use some of Pete Scazzaro's stuff?
Yeah, and I probably offline, I need to have a longer conversation with you because I have some thoughts about a general emotional health inventory and resources, maybe picking 5 areas of emotional health. But I've been really thinking about just leaning into burnout only and really focusing on burnout. You know, there's 3 identifiers of burnout. And if you have 2 of them, you're clinically burnout, and creating resources that just address those 3 and measuring those. Because where I want to go with all this long-term is the emotional health of pastors. Thinking burnout might be a more effective, more precise thing to go into, but love to hear your thoughts and my classmates' thoughts about that.
Well, again, as with Rodney, he's got the intersection of 2 areas of interest. And so you could, on the one hand, measure, you would want it to be simpler. But on the one hand, you could measure emotional health and use some of Pete Scazzaro's stuff. But then you could also measure whether or not burnout is a factor in your sample, whether or not burnout is happening, and draw conclusions from that, and then connect the dots. So it's always a matter in these research projects to find a way to see what variables or what elements of the data you have collected, where are they connecting and why, and what therefore can you conclude? What was missing from their spiritual health, emotional health, of course. You know, Pete would say you can't be spiritually healthy if you're not emotionally healthy. What was missing that may have contributed to their burnout. I was just the second member of a committee of a D.Min student who just had her dissertation published, who did the same thing, but in the Washington, D.C. area. And I think it's very important. I have another student who is in Louisiana, who is a bishop in his denomination. He's in the Church of God in Christ, testing burnout as a factor among their pastors in his area of Louisiana. So burnout, you know, I think, Mike, COVID made it all more difficult because it added stress that was not on pastors before. You know, unless the pastor just checked out and said, COVID, whatever. You know, I was in Florida during COVID, and it was hard to get a Floridian to admit that there was COVID. They were just comfortable to, you know, go to the beach and forget it.
Yeah, I think that and the political climate combined have really forced a lot of burnout and stress, and people are, you know, quitting the pastorate.
So burnout is a new issue. It was an issue in the 80s, and it's a new issue. And I think COVID made it worse. I think it's possible to connect 2 data sets. But again, you're going to use software in the end to record your data and then to help you connect the dots between emotional health and burnout. And where you see the 2 connect, then you want to find out, okay, why? Why did that happen? Why were they connecting? What can I conclude from it that might be helpful then to go forward and suggest a way that if our pastors gave more attention to their emotional health, it would lessen the possibility of burnout. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so would there be a follow-up, like a retest in that scenario? Or would it just be an initial test in that scenario?
If you're doing a survey, it's not really, I'm not envisioning, I may be wrong, Mike, but I'm
Yeah.
not envisioning an educational piece necessarily, but a survey. In fact, a survey project design oftentimes will find an initial quantitative survey helpful, which is structured differently because it then paints a background picture. It gives general information. Quantitative results, quantitative measurements are more work because, you know, it's more scientific in that sense. But with a survey design, sometimes it's helpful to get some broad information in the background. And then kind of with that in mind, design a more qualitative survey.
Yeah.
Which can be, and the quantitative survey can be the larger group, Mike. So you can say, I'm okay if I have 500 people do an online quantitative survey because I've got software that's going to crunch those numbers. So I'm okay with that. But when I do my qualitative survey, I just want 30 people.
Right.
Because you're going to have to dive into that data and decide what it is you think is going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you know, and if I'm hearing you right, so Duke has already been doing some information about the emotional health of pastors and has some, you know, indicators they pulled out, and they've been doing data on that for a while. And then there's this thing called the Maslow Burnout Inventory, which has been around, I think, since the 70s. And, you know, both of them have lots of data sets. And so what you're saying is I could use two existing things and then create a survey between them.
No, you could, and the using an instrument that's already been developed is helpful, particularly if they have information, which Duke should have, on the reliability of the data, tested reliability, and they can give you those numbers, and that helps you. I mean, that makes your research heavier.
Yeah.
It makes it count more. So you could go to Duke and say, look, I'm going to use your measurement. Give me, I know you've tested it already, so give me that data so I can include it in my dissertation. And that will help you as well. You know, I think it's perfectly doable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate the help.
Anyone else? It's 5:57 and I'm not going to take too much of your time. Florestine, did you find yours?
I did. So I found the statement of the problem. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, so the question, what should constitute a contextualized small group based leadership curriculum to train leaders to foster multiculturalism in St. Paul Holiness Church in Dendron, Virginia?
No, that's excellent. I love that idea of training small group leaders. That used to be something churches were paying attention to. I think that's one of those things, Florestine, that kind of fell to the wayside after a while. I think the American church has become less educational than it used to be.
Yes.
And so I think the idea of training small group leaders, because again, you're going to develop a training program and then you're going to test it to see how effective it is. Pretty easy to do that with a curriculum because you decide what you want folks to know. You design a test to measure that. You give it to them before they take your class or whatever. Tell you in advance what they know. And after they take your class, then you give them the exact same exam.
Absolutely.
To see whether or not they learned anything, hoping that to not be depressed if you find out they haven't learned anything.
Yes.
You're hoping that the message got through. So that's just excellent. And it's very doable, Florestine. Where are you again?
St. Paul in Virginia.
In Virginia.
Virginia. And so the title is A Divine Tapestry, a small group fellowship-based curriculum for leaders to foster multiculturalism, again, in St. Paul.
So
a divine tapestry. So it would be a training program.
So Yen, you want more than a generalized training of small group leaders. You would like them to also show understanding and then even skill, because you're going to test whether or not they get it, when it comes to having small groups that are multicultural.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So
So it's the knowledge prior to
Uh,
finding out where people are prior to the training, and then go through a process. And by the end, there's a project that entails, the very thing that they've been trained in, and that is multiculturalism, going out
yeah.
into the community, into different churches.
So you want to ask some follow-up surveys, but I would encourage you to not try to measure the extent to which multiculturalism is happening as a result, because that will be a second whole project.
Okay.
I'm
Duly noted.
I'm all for keeping it simple.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I want.
So I pastored a church for many years in rural Georgia. Rodney knows where LaGrange is. In rural Georgia, they call it Strange LaGrange because it's typical Old South. And I pastored a church with a friend who was a retired NFL lineman who played defensive end for the Cleveland Browns, a very large African-American guy, just loved him to death. I mean, he was huge. And I'm not small. And we had a church that was 60% black, 40% white in rural Georgia. And we had to train people to get into each other's homes, and be comfortable in each other's homes, and eat meals together.
Yes.
And eat, you know what I'm saying, Chloristine? So
absolutely.
to break down those barriers, which are not just racial, they're social.
Social, cultural. Yes, definitely.
But it can be done. It can be done.
I believe it.
No, we did it, and we just loved one another, So it was a lot of fun, quite frankly.
Right.
Before we take off, let me get Tom, because I see his little yellow. Go ahead, Tom.
All right. And I am one of those who has changed the question, partly because the one I was working with before, I was never able to breathe enough life into for it to take off. But what I would say is, as the question I've got now is, what should constitute a simple, replicable, and multiplicative discipleship process by which one person leads 1 to 3 disciples to the end that they each grow in their faith, and then each in turn begins working with 1 to 3 of their own disciples in the First Presbyterian Church of Branson.
Branson, Missouri.
Yes.
Okay, I lived in Springfield for many, many years. So I think I remember commenting on this, Tom.
I was born in Springfield, Missouri. Sorry to interrupt.
Were you really? No, I met my wife and we got married and my kids were born. My dad and I planted a church in Springfield, Missouri. 1972. Wow. It was a long, because
my dad planted one in 1971 in Springfield, Missouri. I was born the year later in 1972.
Drummond, I thought your name was familiar. So I graduated from Evangel University and then went on to the Assemblies of God Theological Seminary. I think I remember telling Tom, look, this is right up the Wesleyan alley, John Wesley, etc., had a whole tradition that did, and I think you can bring that into your historical background research, Tom. What I'm not familiar with, because this is not my background, Tom, is the extent to which folks in the Reformed tradition have really worked hard at this kind of small group strategy. I would love to see what you find out. Obviously, it can be done. I think it would be easier in Branson in that it's kind of rural Southern, isn't it, Tom?
It is.
And Southerners, if you feed them fried chicken, they're going to show up. And so I'm looking forward to finding out what you find. I would caution you with the word replicable, because that's going to force you to test your intervention outside of your immediate context to see whether or not it worked somewhere else. Other than that, I think it's a very doable project.
I was thinking of the idea of working with these disciples, and then they start working with using the same process with their disciples is that replicability.
Okay, so you're thinking about in one research context, you're basically you're discipling disciplers.
Yes.
No, that's excellent. That's excellent. That's very, very good. Good stuff. Pastor, go ahead. I don't want to leave before we get to hear your excellent idea coming out of Ohio.
Well, actually, I was just going to ask if we could stay on afterwards and talk a little bit about it, because I feel like with the feedback I got last week and with what I'm seeing tonight, that it's totally undoable and I have to abandon the direction and go a whole different direction.
Maybe so. You know, I think some of our original ideas end up being a longitudinal. They're doable. They're doable. It's just, do you want to spend 2 years doing it, or do you want to accomplish it all in 2 semesters? Sometimes, you know, it's okay to have those conversations.
Yeah, because I mean, the information you gave me last week is a complete change from what I was told 2 years ago as to what a prototype would involve, and that kind of rules it out.
Yeah.
As a viable project.
Let's follow up though, because I want to make sure Dr. Flynn, you know, I got Matt involved in our conversation. I want to make sure they're clear, because I have a very simple job. My job is to get you ready for 899. And so whether or not, you know, specific elements of project design, methodology, etc., end up being figured out, the details are figured out later.
Yeah, so it's kind of, I don't know what the drop requirements are, but if I'm gonna have to go a different direction, I'm gonna have to drop this class and take some time to figure it out, because I'm gonna have to abandon all the work I did in the first course and all the work I've done in between then and now to try to get ready.
No, we'll make sure that does not happen. Whatever we have to do, we'll make sure that does not happen.
Okay.
You can change a word or two and you'd be surprised.
Yeah,
all right, my friends.
Yeah.
Brother Drummond from Springfield, Missouri. What was your dad's name?
Frederick, same as mine.
Okay, yeah. What tradition was he a part of?
He was born again in a small Baptist church overseas. And then he came into Dallas, went to Bible school in Dallas, went from Dallas to California, Sacramento, and then went from Sacramento to Missouri. And that's where he started a church in Missouri. And that's where I was born.
Okay. What was the name of the church, Frederick?
I think it was Galilean Baptist Church.
Okay. Very good. Very good.
You
Can I pray for you all before we go?
And our dissertations.
Pardon me?
And our ministry projects.
Oh my, yes. But you know, it's a work in progress. I want you to be confident, but I want you to also see that the details of your ministry project will evolve. And it has to be okay. So I don't expect you to have all the details figured out. And again, you know, I want to tell 897 students, you can't start collecting data until Dr. Flynn says you can. So you have to go through the HSR project, which is where the details will be determined. We're not going to do that. And so don't be discouraged by that. Just feel like, you know, I've got some flexibility. I don't have to figure it all out by the end of this process. I just need to have enough of a sense of direction to convince Dr. Flynn that I'm ready for a chair. Let's go and do it. So be encouraged in that sense. I hope you find a bit of flexibility encouraging, so that you don't feel like you have to have it all together by the end of the spring semester. You just kind of need to know where you want to go, and convince, you know, Dr. Flynn that you're right. So let's pray together. Father, I thank you for these great students. What a blessing they are and will continue to be. I thank you for the tremendous contribution they're going to make to a variety of ministry contexts. They're going to be able to bear fruit not only specifically through their research, but they're going to be able to bear fruit for the long term in a variety of settings. So we're believing you for the inspiration, the instruction of your Holy Spirit. We're believing you for a wisdom, even unusual wisdom. Drop words of wisdom into their hearts and minds as they go forward in the development of all that they're going to do. And I pray that you would give them favor in advance with the context that they're going to be researching in, that you will lead them to the specific people that will give them the information that will be helpful for them, and that in the end, you would be glorified and honored, and your people would be blessed as a result. I pray that you would bless them, Father, bless their families, cover them, protect them, give them just a wonderful, peaceful, a semester, a process filled with your shalom. And we thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Asplund.
God bless you, my friends. I'm going to stay on. Mike, it's good to see you again. Julie, my friend in Kansas, it's good to see you again. Glorstein, God bless you. It's good to see all of you. Z is in the gym, so I've been recording for whoever.
I've been listening the whole time.
Hey, man, you the man. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
So-
I've been listening the whole time. I just didn't want to take my mute off because you would hear the background noise. And now I'm dropping my players off at home, so I've been listening the whole time.
All
They had
right.
to class with me.
Well, God bless you, man. I'm going to stop the recording.